Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another PBALC Literacy Speaking live stream show. Today, we are excited to welcome author Madeline Martin. She's going to be discussing her book, The Booklovers Library. So excited to have you, Madeline.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, let's get right into it because I know there's a lot to discuss and you'll be reading a portion of your book. So we're excited to hear that. Introduce yourself to our viewers and followers and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I am an author of historical romance and historical fiction. I don't really do romance as much anymore, but I'd written about 35 books before I switched over and started doing historical fiction. And so I've written 5 historical fiction. My next one comes out in September. It's a Victorian called The Secret Book Society. And I live in sunny Jacksonville, Florida, St. Augustine area. And I have 2 very spoiled cats, which I'm not at all apologetic for that, a wonderful husband, and 2 fabulous teen daughters.
Well, St. Augustine is a perfect place to for a setting for another book.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Oh, trust me, I've thought about it for sure.
And so why did you switch over from romance to historical?
I really, as a reader, I started reading historical fiction. In fact, my favorite books that I fell in love with were Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House in the Big Woods series. And I loved it so much because it just brought history to life for me. And it was something that I always kind of wanted to go back to, and not as a reader, but as an author. And it was, excuse me, one of those things where it's really daunting because you have to know so much about history. And, I would hazard to say that the historical aspect of it is actually more important than even the protagonist, because with historical fiction, that's what people are wanting from that. And I didn't know that I would have the time because I was working full time as a business analyst and writing like 6 to 8 romances a year and doing a mom and doing all the mom things. And so I ended up getting laid off. And I thought, okay, well, this is a really great time to sort of redirect my focus and spend that time on writing my historical fiction. And kind of a funny story about getting laid off, because I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I told my husband, well, if I do get laid off, I think I just want to try writing full time because of how tired I was because of doing all the things. And he said, okay, that's fine. So when I got laid off, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is going to be so nice to just write full time. I get to have the house to myself. It's going to be so quiet. Well, that was February 2020. The pandemic.
Oh no!
Like 3 weeks later, and everybody was home. But it did give me the opportunity to really get to focus on a historical fiction, which was my first one, the Last Bookshop in London, and that has just kind of set the pace for me. And I'm still writing historical fiction.
Fabulous. Well, historical fiction, like you said, there's a lot of pressure because your readers will be like, that's not right. That didn't happen. I don't think that's how it happened. Your readers will keep you their account, there's accountability to your readers in that part because they'll be like, I don't think that really happened.
Right.
Even though it's
spoiler alert, I didn't live during that time. So, I swear, like, even if I spent 25 years researching a book, you would still get some things wrong because at the end of the day, but I always try very, very hard to make it as absolutely accurate as possible. It is something that I definitely strive for.
And do you enjoy the historical fiction better than romance, or?
I do. It is something that I enjoy. I discovered, I always thought that I was just, like a history nerd, but I've also discovered that I'm also a research nerd. I absolutely love doing the research. I will have, dozens and dozens and dozens of nonfiction books and spend afternoons just pouring through them and enjoying them. And actually, I'm leaving on Monday to go to England for a 2-week research trip for my next book, which will be coming out in 2026 about the witch trials in the 1600s.
Oh man, what a dream, right?
Yeah, I've got all these like private tours booked, and I've been like communicating with them because it's getting closer, and it's just really, really cool. I'm really excited.
Well, we'd love, hopefully one day you'll get to come to the Texas Book Festival in Austin. We'd love to have you.
Oh man, that'd be great. My parents actually used to live in Austin, so it'd be fun to kind of get to come back and see it.
Yes. And so what inspired you, and you touched a little bit about on this, but what inspired you to become a writer?
I have always kind of had, I think, like writing on the brain. When I was a little girl and we would have to draw pictures, I wouldn't draw just one. I would draw like a series of pictures. Like I was trying to even tell a story before I could even like actually form words, like and like literary. And my mom had saved all of my accolades from like the time I was born. And, it was like best person in class today, most well behaved. Like she saved all of it. And so she sent it all to me and I started going through it. And I happened to notice that I had all of these like little chapters and these book plots that my mom had saved and put through here. And I think that I've just kind of been writing stories in my head ever since I could remember. And so as an adult, what got me started actually writing books itself is I was on maternity leave with my first daughter and I was reading Outlander. And I really enjoyed sort of that dynamic of like the brawny Scotsman and the feisty Sassenach, and I thought that this would be such a fun dynamic to bring into a romance novel as well and kind of write one. And so that's what got me into writing romance. And then, over time, as I started to, just learn more about history and learn more about writing, that's when I kind of was like, I think I want to delve a little bit deeper into the historical aspect of it and go full force and just go historical fiction. And it's been it's been like a pretty amazing journey.
And so how do you develop your characters? A lot of authors say, oh, I just base it on like a friend that I had a long time ago, a relative. It's like, because you're writing historical fiction, how do you develop those characters?
That's a really great question. So I actually I spent about 10 months doing research, and because I've written so many books, I can write very quickly. And so I do about 10 months of research, and then I realize, oh my gosh, this book is due in 2 months, and then I have to frantically write it. So, so somewhere sort of in between the panic of needing to write it in 2 months and that 10-month research is when I start to really develop my characters. Like I have an idea for each one, and it's almost like percolating with every single thing that I read, because a lot of the characters in my books are basically amalgamations of firsthand accounts that I've read from other people. So it's almost like a blend of a bunch of different historical people, but that's just sharing their experiences and doesn't offer anything about their backstory. So when I put my characters together, I like to find authentic pictures from that particular time period, which means I can't ever share these pictures because it could be somebody's grandmother and that could be awkward. So I don't ever share them. They're just for me. And then I have an entire dossier pretty much that I put together on each individual character. If somebody's had more than a couple of lines, I can tell you, their fears, what they're dreaming of, their childhood trauma, how they dealt with that, if they dealt with it or are still dealing with it. I have like this whole entire world built up for every single one of these characters. And then from there, that's when I incorporate that aspect into the historical detail, because I feel like history kind of plots the book for me, right? It's like kind of a cheat because
I was going to say, your characters need to mold with the time period too. If like you're writing about the 1800s, that character is going to be very different than you're writing some from a time period like in the 1940s or 30s or something like
Absolutely. And part of that character creation also goes into the historical research, because I'm not going to just research the particular time period that I'm writing about. I'm going to research about 100 years beforehand and everything leading up to that moment, because that will help to shape the culture and the mood and the attitude of what that person is growing up in. And so you're going to have a dynamic character, and all of the people around them react so much differently to events that transpire and like a book set in England, for example, like with the Booklovers Library. That's horrible. Totally just had to right there on my own title. Versus something like with The Keeper of Hidden Books in Warsaw, Poland, because they are in such incredibly different dynamic areas, and you're going to have different dynamic characters as a result of that.
Have you ever considered doing like fantasy type of like writing, historical writing?
I don't know. I actually did come up with a dystopian idea one time, and I sent it to my agent at the time, and she was like, it's a dying vein. I don't think this is going to go anywhere, which is kind of funny to look back at now. But I'm really just enjoying the historical fiction aspect, and I do have some ideas for like contemporary. And I feel like people are doing romantasy and fantasy so well right now. I think I'll stay out of that wheelhouse.
It's definitely having its time right now, right?
Yes, definitely. When I
So
think if I ever did do that, I would need to have like 3 years to really put that together, like build that whole world.
So tell us about your newest book, the Booklovers Library. How did that book come about?
So with the Booklovers Library, I was doing, I'm always just kind of reading historical articles because I'm a history nerd and just can't help myself. And so I happened to come across this one article that was talking about the Booklovers Library, which was this lending library. And so kind of, I guess to back up a little bit, when I first wrote The Last Bookshop in London, that was the first time that I'd heard about something called Operation Pied Piper, which is where children had to be redistributed throughout England to keep them safe from bombings that would happen in big cities and in areas that would have, like, for example, Nottingham, where they had factories. And that really stuck with me because as a mother, I can't imagine sending my children away for an undisclosed amount of time, not knowing where they're even going, and when I'm going to see them again. I mean, it must have just been such a heartbreaking thing. So I knew I eventually wanted to write a book about it, but I really needed the right setting for it. And so when I read about the Booklovers Library and how it was this lending library, and it had all these like really kind of quirky people that would come into it, like when I started reading about them. And then I realized that this was also during the time of the marriage bar, which meant that when women got married, they had to give up their jobs to become full-time wives and mothers. And apparently the women who worked as librarians for the Booklovers Library, they loved their jobs so much that they had statistically longer engagements than women in other areas of employment. And I thought, I think this sounds like such a lovely place to work, number one. Obviously, like they'd rather work than get married.
Yes.
And also like these quirky characters, how fun, I mean, quirky people, how fun would they be to make into real characters that come into the store? And this was exactly the lighthearted sort of setting that I wanted for that really heavy topic of a mother having to send her daughter away, so that you don't just read the book and feel like you're beating your head against a brick wall. There's a lot of like charming characters who are really endearing, and there's these wonderful scenarios that are surrounded about books, and it just really, I feel like, lent a lot of warmth to the story that could otherwise feel very heavy.
Yeah, some of my favorite books always had the quirky, charming characters. You always love those quirky, charming characters in books.
Are the best.
So what do you hope, before you go into reading a selection for our viewers, what do you hope is the biggest takeaway that you want your readers to take from the Booklovers Library?
I think I always have a message with books, about books, like, in my stories. And this one really does just kind of come through with wanting people to realize that there's always comfort and love and hope to be found in books. But there's also another element of this. And because the protagonist is a single mother, she's a widowed single mother, and she deals with a lot of difficulty as a result, not only by, having to be a single parent raising her child, but also a lot of judgment from people around her. And this really actually stems from a lot of personal research that I had because I was a single mother for a while. And you would think this day and age that there really wouldn't be that kind of judgment that there was in the 40s. But unfortunately, there's a significant amount of judgment. And so I hope that people come away from this maybe having a little bit more understanding about people who are having to be single parents and the difficulty and how people are perceiving them. So that is also something that I do hope that people take away.
So do you find comfort in books and writing?
Oh yeah, I always have. Yes, definitely. Yeah. I used to be an Army brat, and so we moved like every 3 to 4 years. And I think that's where my love of reading really came from, is because I was always so painfully shy when I was younger, and going to a new school was always so difficult. And so I usually would find my way to the library, and the librarian would point me in the direction of a book that had a character that I could connect with and feel not so alone, for a little while. And so to me, I think librarians are just superheroes because they open worlds of understanding and love to kids who maybe don't feel it at that time.
Yeah. And I kind of am the same way. I grew up in a small town. So when you grow up in a small town, there's not a lot to do. But the library was always a place that that always was comforting, and it was, you can just sit there and read books or do activities. So it was a great little place for somebody growing up in a small town with
Oh, I love
a lot
that.
to do, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you want, biggest takeaway that for your viewers is that, books are comforting, libraries are comforting. It's a safe place for people to go
Absolutely.
to.
Yeah.
So, can you now read a selection from the book for our viewers?
Sure will. So I will start off with the prologue. Well, I'm not going to keep going after the prologue, but I'm going to read the prologue. Okay. Prologue, Nottingham, England, April 1931. Just one more chapter. Emma lingered in the storage area on the second floor of her father's bookshop, Tower Bookshop, with Jane Austen's Emma cradled in her lap. Sadly, not her namesake. Her parents had named her Emmeline for an aunt she'd never met who had died on Emma's 7th birthday 10 years ago. Still, the book was one of Emma's favorites. Emma! Papa's voice rose from somewhere in the bookshop, sharp with irritation. She frowned. Papa was seldom ever cross with her. Perhaps the smoke from the man who had come in with a cigar earlier still lingered in the shop. She settled a scrap of paper into the spine of her book. Emmeline! Something to that second cry snapped her to attention, a raw, frantic pitch. Papa was never panicked. She leapt up from her seat with such haste the book dropped to the ground with a whomp. I'm in the warehouse, she called, racing to the door. The handle was scalding hot. She yelped and drew back. That's when she saw the smoke. Wisps seeping beneath the door, glowing in the stream of sunlight. Fire. She put her skirt over her hand and twisted to open the knob. Thick plumes of smoke billowed in, black and choking. She sucked in a breath of surprise, unintentionally inhaling a lungful of burning air. A cough racked her, and she stumbled back, her mind reeling as her feet pulled her from the threat. But to where? This was the only exit from the storeroom, save for the second-floor window. Papa! She shouted, terror creeping in her voice. All at once he was there, wrapping a blanket around them, the one that she kept in the shop for cold mornings before the furnace managed to heat the old building. Stay by my side. Papa's voice was gravelly beneath the blanket where he'd covered the lower part of his face. Even as he led her away, a great cough shuddered through his lean frame. Beyond the wall of smoke was a vision straight out of Milton's Paradise Lost as fire licked and climbed its way up the towering stacks of books, devouring a lifetime of careful curation. Emma screamed, the sound muted by the blanket. But Papa's hand was firm at her back, pressing her forward. We have to run! Not slowing, he guarded her to the winding metal staircase. She used to love clattering down it as a girl, hearing the metal ringing around her. It's hot, Papa cautioned. Don't touch it. Emma hugged against his side as they squeezed down the narrow steps that barely fit the two of them together. It swayed beneath their weight, no longer sturdy as it had once been. The blazing heat felt as though it was blistering Emma's skin. Too hot, too close, too much. And they were plunging deeper into the fiery depths. The soles of Emma's shoes stuck to the last two steps as rubber melted against metal. What had once been rows of books was now a maze of flames. Even Papa hesitated before the seemingly impassable blaze. Oh, flames. Blaze. Sorry. This is why I have such a hard time reading my own stuff. But there was nowhere else to go. The fire was alive, cracking and popping and hissing and roaring, 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 so loud it seemed like an actual beast. Go, he shouted, and his grip tightened around her, pulling her forward. Together they ran between the columns of fire that had once been shelves of books. An ear-splitting crack came from above, spurring them to the front as fire and sparks poured down behind them. Emma ran faster than she had ever run before, faster than she knew herself capable. Papa's arm at her side yanked her this way or that, navigating her through the fiery chaos until there was nowhere to go. Papa roared louder than the fire beast and released her, running toward the blazing door. It flew open at the impact, revealing a clean, sunny day outside. He turned toward her even as she rushed after him and grabbed her around the shoulders, hauling her into the street. Emma gulped in the clean air, reveling in the cool dampness washing into her tortured lungs. A crowd had gathered, staring up at the Tower Bookshop. Some came to Emma and Papa, asking in a frenzy of voices if they were hurt. In the distance came the scream of emergency sirens. Sirens Emma had heard her entire life, but had never once needed herself. There was need now. She held onto Papa's hand and looked behind her at the building that had been in her family for 2 generations and was meant to become hers someday. Her gaze skimmed over the bookshop to the top 2 floors where their home had once been. The fire beast gave a great heaving howl, and the top floor crumpled. Someone grabbed her from behind, dragging her back as the rest of the structure came down, ripping her hand from her father's. She didn't reach for him again, unable to move, unable to think, her eyes fixed on the building as it crashed in on itself in a fiery heap. Their livelihood, their home. All the pictures of her mother who had died after Emma was born, all the books she and her father had lovingly selected from bookshops around England on trips they'd taken together, everything they'd owned, gone. Emma choked on a sob at the realization. Everything was gone. "We need a doctor!" A man's voice broke through her horror, pulling her attention to her father. He lay on the ground, motionless. Soot streaked his handsome, slender face, and his thick gray hair that had once been in the same shade of chestnut as hers was now singed into blackened tufts. "Papa?" She sagged onto the ground beside him. He lifted his eyes to her, watery blue and filled with a love that made her heart swell. The breath wheezed from his chest like a kettle's cry. "You're safe." All the words left his mouth. Once the words left his mouth, his body relaxed, going slack. "Papa?" Emma cried. This time his eyes did not meet hers. They looked through her, sightless and empty. She shuddered at how unnatural he appeared, like her father, and yet not at all like her father. "Papa?" The wailing sirens were still too far off. "I'm a doctor." A man knelt on the other side of her father. His fingers went to Papa's blackened neck, and the man's sad brown eyes turned up toward her. "I'm sorry, love. He's gone." Emma stared at the man, refusing to believe her ears even as she saw the truth for herself. It had always just been Emma and her father, the two of them against the world, as Papa used to say. They read the same books to discuss together. They worked every day at the bookshop together. Friends and colleagues as much as they were father and daughter. Once Emma had completed her schooling, she'd even traveled with him, curating books like the first editions they were still waiting to arrive from Newcastle. Now that beautiful light that shone in his eyes had dulled, lifeless. It was no longer Papa and her against the world. He was gone. Their shop was gone. Their home was gone. Everything she knew and loved was gone.
Oh my.
I should have read that with like a book.
Can you imagine though, I was just, as you were reading that, can you imagine a young person having to grow up during the Blitz and all that chaos?
Oh my gosh, I know.
It's just lovely that they're, like you said, like a safe place for them in this Booklovers Library, traveling library.
Yes. Although I have to say, Saskia Marleveld is my narrator, and she does a much better job than I do. And she has a lovely English accent that she puts into all of it. So
I just love listening to audiobooks that when the narrator has an English accent. I don't know. It just
well, and
relaxing,
actually,
doesn't it?
Saskia is not even English. I think she's actually Australian, but she lives in America. And she does an amazing English accent, but she just did such a great job on this book. I didn't want to insult her by trying to make my own English accent for these characters.
Well, I've just, as you were reading, like I said, can you imagine having, this chaos, fire in Blitz and sirens all the time, and it's like I just want somewhere where I can feel safe and warm and not have to deal with all this chaos around me all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm sure that, the characters that were attracted to the library also probably felt the same way. They're like, I need a space that just is away from all this chaos.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, thank you for reading that, Madeline. What other projects? I know you've written so many great, wonderful books, but what other projects or books are you currently working on?
So my book that comes out in 2025 is a Victorian, and it's called The Secret Book Society. It is about, and we're going to be doing the cover reveal soon, so I'm super excited about that because it's really, really beautiful.
And I would say the Booklovers cover is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. So the Secret Book Society is basically, there is a young widow. She's been widowed 3 times. She's a countess, and she discovers that women are having their reading materials restricted from them by the men in their lives because they're wasting their time on books, and they should be focused on their families and wives. And so she creates this Secret Book Society where she invites them under the auspices of tea, but they talk about books that are very empowering, and they all kind of start to learn a little bit more about each other. and how they aren't really necessarily so perfect, and they're all trapped. And it kind of has everything that I love about the Victorian time period. It's like hat pin fighting. There's like a poison garden. There's hair jewelry. There's a seance. Like I just completely like had such a wonderful time writing this. But it's very much a women building up other women sort of a book. And there might be a murder. I don't know. So as of September 2025, you are cordially invited to the Secret Book Society. And then my next one that I'm going to England to research is called A Time of Witches. And that one is a dual timeline with a contemporary character set in Savannah, Georgia, who discovers that she might be part of a line of witches, and witch trials that take place in the 1600s in England. And for people who want to follow along on that one, it's not available for pre-order yet, but on Goodreads, I always make sure that I keep an up-to-date kind of like a little journal about how the book is coming along for people, you know, who want to follow me along on the journey of writing that book. So A Time of Witches does actually have its own little Goodreads page. And I've already started to kind of keep track of things there for anybody who wants to follow that journey.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you know, and speaking of the secret, you said the Secret
Book Society.
It's, you know, literacy, you know, we're an adult literacy organization, and literacy has always been sometimes withheld from certain groups, and it's on purpose. So I'm so interested to see your final book, because it's like that literacy has always been
it's
kind
not
of
always been a right.
used to kind of have power over people, in particular like the woman.
Right. Well, and
other minority groups.
Women were so restricted in everything that they did. I mean, including even what they read. And so, you know, there's so much power.
And so did this actually happen during the Victorian time?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. The Secret Book Society itself, no, but women having their reading materials restricted. Oh, absolutely. They were really relegated to things like Mrs. Beaton's book on household management and things like that, you know, really, they didn't offer a whole lot of, you know, depth.
Yes. Well, I am excited to be able to read that one, and also the witches one.
I appreciate that.
So where can people get more information on your books, and where can they purchase them?
So thank you for asking. My website is madelinemartin.com. On Facebook, I do have an author page there. And if you go to my Instagram, it's at Madeline M. Martin, because somebody had already taken Madeline Martin, unfortunately. And I will say, too, that I really do love to meet with book clubs. So on my website, there's a book clubs tab. It has PDFs if anybody wants to just have that PDF for their book club. But if anybody ever wants me to do a Zoom chat with them, I always do it for free. I just love meeting with people. So if I have the availability, then I will join you. So just fill out that little form, and we can chat books.
Well, we appreciate you. And we appreciate being able to feature you as well.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure. I appreciated you guys reaching out.
Well, because I always ask all of our authors that we feature, because we love PBA here at PBA ELC. We love reading, and we think reading is such a critical part of literacy education. What are you currently reading, and give us some recommendations?
Okay, well, I just finished reading Jane Yang's new book, The Lotus Shoes. And oh my gosh, it was so good. I read it in like 2 days. And I picked it up totally because it had a gorgeous cover. I know we're not supposed to buy books by their cover, but I absolutely did with this one. And it basically is about two women from different classes in 1800s China. You have the woman who is the upper crust, you know, she's the daughter who's been raised with everything. And you have her slave, her Mizu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, because, you know, you read things and it's a certain pronunciation in your head. But it's basically her slave. And it's sort of their relationship and their dynamic as they encounter all these things in their life. And they're kind of on the cusp of womanhood growing up together. And it really was just such an incredibly just evocative book. I feel like it really transported me to 1800s China, and the relationship and the characters were just so deep. So The Lotus Shoes by Jane Yang, it's such a good book. I highly recommend it.
We'll have to check that one out.
Yeah.
And maybe feature her if we're able to. Well, I want to thank you again, Madeline, for joining us this afternoon. And everybody make sure and check her out on social media, and give her recommendations on the Goodreads thing that she has set up for you. And we'll include her website and any of her and all of her socials in the comments after the live stream, so you can go check out her book and purchase her book. We always recommend purchasing from independent bookshops or bookshop.com if possible. So all of her books are available online.
You can do Libro FM for audiobooks, and it also
Libro
supports your independent bookstores. And bookstore.org also now does ebooks. So you can get your ebooks and you can still support local independent bookstores. I'm a huge fan of giving love to independent bookstores.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So are we. Well, thank you again, Madeline. And thank you everyone for watching. And we'll see everyone next time. And safe travels on your trip to
thank you. And thank
England.
you so much for the lovely interview. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Thank you. See everyone next time.